My name is Krista Blair, and I am the program manager for Talent 25, which is a partnership between De Montfort University and Arts Council England. It is a longitudinal research study, which really means we are researching people over a very long period of time. In our case, we are following babies. We hope for the next 25 years, babies and their families, to see what difference participating in arts and cultural activities makes to their lives. I have brought with me today, I've had a brief from Amy. I know that we're supposed to keep our discussion really short, because really what we want is a conversation between you and our researchers. And with me today is our principal investigator, Professor Bertha Ochieng, and one of our research team members, Dr. Amara Adaksani. Also our project officer, Chris Owens, who is involved in a lot of our down on the ground research. I'm going to show you a few slides, but then really very much we want to get to talking to you guys about what it was that interested you and what our research might mean for people who are out there actually working with families. So, our first most challenging thing is actually getting the slides up. Amy and I had a little bit of a panicked moment before you joined us, so we'll just see if we're able to do this. Amy, how are we doing here? Let me know if the slides actually come up. Do we have some slides?
Slides. If you could just, yeah, I can see the slides, so I think we're good to go.
Fantastic. So what I'm going to talk about today is just to flag up a few of the emerging findings coming from our research. So as I've said, Talent 25 is looking at what difference engagement and participation in arts and creative activity makes to babies and their families. And in this first stage of the research, we are following babies and their families over the first few years of their lives. And we're interested in a couple of things. First of all, we know that some families, arts and culture is a big part of life, and then for other families, less so. So we're trying to understand what it is that affects people engaging in arts and creative activities, particularly in those first few years of life. So what is it that helps or hinders early years families? And how might we get more children engaged in creative play and creative activities? And then, of course, what difference does that make to people's lives over the long term? So as part of that, Talent 25, and this was before the pandemic, Talent 25 was delivering activities, creative activities in a community setting to early years families. And of course, our researchers were studying both how you do that and what the effects on the families were. But just like everybody else, we were caught by surprise when suddenly we have the Prime Minister going on television and telling everybody, oh, that's it, folks. Everybody should stay at home now. And so, just like everyone else, we had that, oh my goodness, what's happening here? And then the gradual adjustment and thinking about what do we do next? Let's get people back into creative activity, but is there a way to do it online? So we took our creative sessions and we moved them into the online world. And some of the parents and their babies, and these are very young babies, we're talking about under 2 years old, joined us for creative sessions online. And so I want to talk to you about what it is that we found from that. So the first thing to say is that although researchers are used to learning things, it was a learning experience for all of us. And we experienced many challenges in taking the research study and taking those creative activities into an online world and thinking differently about what does online mean. And very much a lot of what came out of the research was people learning how to do what they'd always done. So early years practitioners, for example, finding that things were very different in an online, a virtual world. And our researchers were told about, well, what do you do when you have a physical practice? And then after years, you have that loss of physicality, loss of sensory information from the families you're working with, loss of that shared physical space. So there was some very interesting work there. And people were talking to us about new strategies, new ways of working, and actually how you did that sort of work differently in a virtual world. So that might be one of the areas that you would like to talk to our researchers about today. We also, of course, had some very interesting things come up about why parents chose or didn't choose to engage with us online and to engage in creative activity in particular online. So I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a moment. And then, of course, some of our research is about, okay, what actually then happened in these new spaces for creative play? In online creative play, what does that look like? And in creative sessions that were being done in a home environment. And for us, that was particularly interesting in terms of how that changed the activity, how that changed the relationships between the artists and the creative practitioners that we were working with and the parents and babies. And also what this meant for how easy or not it was for different families to participate in creativity. And of course, one of the last things, and I'm going to say a little bit more about each of these three things in a minute. One of the last things that we were looking at is, all right, well, what difference did it make? What difference did it make to the families? There was a tremendous effort to move that activity online, and families themselves went to an effort in order to engage with us online. But what did that do for the parents and the babies? So I'll say a little bit about each of these things. So first of all, we were looking at why people chose or didn't choose to participate in creative sessions online with us. Because of course that wasn't a given. Not all of the people who were participating in the Talent 25 study decided to join us in the online sessions. And one of the things that we found coming out of the research was that the decision for parents to do this was very much affected by the pandemic and in particular by concerns that they had about the effect of the lockdown on their babies and the lack of any other opportunities to do things with their babies. So here, of course, you can see one of our participants was saying, well, a lot of moms were looking for something to give that continuity for their children when a lot of the other opportunities were no longer available. And for us, I think one of the interesting things is that we had some participants who were saying that they did not continue activities for themselves online. So lockdown came, there was an offer from this or that group that they had been involved with to do something online. They didn't take up that offer, but they did take up this offer for their children. And they did this despite some of them describing both positive and negative ideas about online activity. A number of our research participants talked to us about what this parent here was talking about. It was, they didn't really expect it to be that good. But despite that, and because of the particular conditions of the pandemic, they made the decision to engage anyway. For me, this is quite interesting in the sense of getting over that initial hurdle that stops people from doing things, particularly stops people from doing digital types of activity. And that's the interesting thing, I think, about the pandemic, perhaps a silver lining in the pandemic, is this trying things that we might not otherwise have tried, and the parents trying things they didn't otherwise try. So it overcame that reluctance. And although our parents then told us that they still preferred face-to-face, particularly because of the social aspect of face-to-face sessions for early years families, some of them would consider, after the pandemic, also doing online. So there may be a shift there for people. So I talked about the way that this sort of early years activity changes when you go from a community center to an online setting. And the first thing, of course, to say is that we realized that it wasn't just an online setting. It was an online setting, but also a home-based setting. So it told us things about doing things with early years families online, but also in the home. So the online aspect, of course, one of the biggest changes was changes to people's social interaction. We did this on Teams. There were limits to the technology. There were limits to people's Wi-Fi connections. So there was not a lot of opportunity to talk to and socialize with other parents. And of course, our babies couldn't talk to or socialize with other babies. So we did find that this meant that there was less of a group feeling, less social interaction. At the same time, some of what we found when we interviewed participants suggested that this might have encouraged more interaction within the home, more cross-age or intergenerational interaction, more interaction amongst the siblings than if mother had taken the baby to an early years session outside the house. We also had our early years practitioners experimenting with different ways to recreate that feeling of a shared experience that you would get if you were in a shared space online. For example, practitioners making sure that they sent the same materials to each family before a session, so people were doing things at the same time with the same things. A little bit about the home environment, because for us this is quite exciting. There were two things that people talked about here in terms of the home environment. And one of these was about basing activities in the home did help some participants in their own words to participate more in the activity. So particularly people who, for example, had social anxiety, they described this as an easier thing for them. As well, some people said, just in terms of the convenience, parents who would have difficulty leaving the home, in some cases, parents were temporarily less able to leave the home. For example, one participant said that they were clinically vulnerable. And in this case, the online delivery had actually enabled participation by enabling them to be in a home setting, but to engage in this group activity. A number of participants as well, and we had feedback from practitioners on this, also suggested that they might have more actively participated at home, that there was perhaps more responsibility on the parent, so that rather than sort of sitting back and receiving a service, the parent actually had a more active role in what they were doing with their baby. Okay. And of course, I mentioned that we were looking at, well, what difference does this make? Well, some of the parents described to us changes in how they thought about play and how they played with their babies, which was a wonderful thing coming out of this. Learning different approaches to play, and particularly where they were in their homes, that they didn't need expensive resources. They didn't need particular things, that they could do things with their babies just in their own environment with their own resources. And there's some evidence that participation at home helped parents to change their behaviors and to sustain new activities outside of the sessions and after the sessions. And here we have one of the participants saying, well, the fact that the activities are done at home, it makes it easy to continue to do the activities at home. Another parent, for example, said, I know now that I just need to look around my home and I will find things that I can use in creative play and playing with my baby.